He offered coins without questions. She scrubbed his floors and vanished by dusk. But when he trailed her home out of curiosity, what he found shattered something deep in him and changed everything he thought he knew about quiet people. The only reason he noticed her in the first place was because she didn't speak. Not when he handed her the broom, not when she hauled water from the well, not even when she scraped blood from the floorboards where a wounded coyote had limped in during the storm last month. The first time Illy Mercer hired her, he figured she wouldn't last the day. She was small, maybe late 20s, with a quiet face and a spine that didn't seem to bend under exhaustion. Her clothes were stitched more than they were whole, and her boots looked like they might give out any second. But she worked like silence itself, thorough, invisible, never asking for more than what was promised. He paid her a silver coin that first evening, expecting her to count it, maybe haggle. She didn't. Just nodded, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked back toward the hills without so much as a good-bye. No wagon, no horse, no man waiting at the bend. She disappeared into the trees like she belonged to them. Illy didn't think about her after that. Not really. He was a man who kept to himself. Widowed 5 years, former cattle runner turned surveyor, and living alone in a cabin 3 miles out of Wren Valley. But 3 weeks later, she came again. Same hour, same silence, same work. Left the coin untouched on his table when he wasn't looking. He watched her the third time she came, then the fourth. Something about the way she moved struck him. Not like someone used to labor, but like someone who had no choice in it. Like someone always waiting for the next blow to fall, even in silence. By the 5th visit he knew her name. It wasn't from her lips. He never heard her speak a word, but from a note scrolled on a small cloth satchel she left by the door. Myra Jansen. Neat handwriting, soft letters, no surname stitched in. The 6th time Illy followed her. He didn't mean to, not really. But dusk came fast, and he found himself on the porch watching her vanish again into the thick line of trees at the edge of his clearing. There was no trail he could see, no road a wagon might take, just dense brush and hills. He saddled his horse and told himself he was just riding to check the north fence. He turned back, maybe wave if she looked over her shoulder, but she didn't. She never looked back. The trail she took wounded, sharp and narrow, barely wide enough for a man on foot. He dismounted halfway and walked the rest. It was almost dark by the time he crested the last ridge, and then he saw it. Not a home, not even a shack, just a H well tucked beneath the remains of an old miner's shed. The roof was patched with tarps. Smoke snuck from a crooked chimney like a dying breath. Children, 5 of them, the oldest couldn't have been more than 10. The youngest was still toddling in bare feet through frozen dirt. Myra was inside, her silhouette flickering behind torn curtains, stirring something in a dented pot. Illy stood there too long, not moving, not breathing, just watching the life that bloomed like weeds in the cracks of ruin. Then the toddler tripped. A sharp cry, then silence. Myra rushed out barefoot, swept the child into her arms, cooed something, words Illy couldn't hear. She kissed the boy's forehead and carried him inside. The other children moved like clockwork, gathering firewood, fetching water from a near-frozen stream, mending torn blankets. Not a single complaint, not a single cry of hunger, just motion. Survival. Illy left without saying a word. The next morning he nailed a sack of flour to her doorframe. Left without waiting for thanks. A week later it was gone. The week after that she showed up again at his cabin, said nothing, cleaned everything, left the coin untouched. Only this time, before leaving, she paused at the door just for a moment, looked back, then gone. By the end of that month, he'd stopped pretending he wasn't watching the trail. He started leaving extra on the table, biscuits wrapped in cloth, a jar of honey. She never took more than one thing. Once she left a note, "Please stop." That was all, not angry, just quiet, final. So he stopped or tried to. But one day the boy came, 10 years old, maybe. Soot-stree with a voice, too, for someone that small. He knocked like he'd practiced, like he'd rehearsed the rhythm. Illy opened the door to see the boy clutching a basket of eggs and a note. "For the help, that's all we can give. Thank you," the boy said. Then he turned and left before Illy could speak. That night it snowed hard, the kind of snow that crushed roofs and killed cattle. Illy sat up near the fire, staring at the closed door. Myra didn't come the next morning, nor the next. On the third day, he couldn't sit still. He saddled his horse before dawn and rode until the trail narrowed again. This time he didn't wait on the ridge. The roof had collapsed, just the corner, but enough. Smoke no longer curled from the chimney. The children were huddled beneath thick quilts inside, eyes wide and watchful. Myra was not among them. "Myra," Illy called softly. No answer. He stepped inside. Heat still lingered from embers buried deep in ash. One of the younger girls blinked up at him, wide-eyed, clutching a doll missing an arm. "Mama went for help," she whispered, when the boy, older now, protective, stood beside her. "Yesterday, said she'd come back by night. She hadn't." Illy didn't wait. He rode toward the main trail, searching every path she could have taken. It was near dusk when he found her, curled beneath a fallen pine, her leg twisted and her arm bent wrong. She was conscious, barely, her lips cracked, blood on her sleeve. "I was coming back," she murmured. Illy didn't speak, just lifted her gently and carried her to his horse. When he brought her into the cabin, the children gasped. He had brought them all, loaded into a cart, bundled in quilts, silent and stiff with fear. Now they sat huddled by the fire as Myra slept on his bed, pale and still. It was the first time Illy Mercer let anyone else inside his home since his wife died 5 years ago. It wouldn't be the last. The snow didn't let up for 3 more days. Each morning, Illy rose early and stoked the fire before the cabin lost what little heat it had held through the night. He made oats when there were oats, boiled water when there wasn't, and tried not to look too long at Myra sleeping in his bed, her brow glistening with fever, her arms splinted with a piece of kindling and tied in place with one of his old shirts. The children never asked him questions. They just existed around him, soft, footed and solemn, like shadows with names. The oldest, Nathan, was 11 and already half a man in how he spoke and carried himself. He never left Myra's side for long, not unless it was to fetch more wood or soothe the younger ones when they cried. Lisa was next, 9, with sharp eyes and hands that knew how to thread a needle better than most grown women Illy had met. She was the one who organized the quilts at night, who portioned the bread carefully into even strips, who kept Ben, Tommy, and Clara close whenever door opened. Ben was 7, already missing 2 front teeth, and still kept a slingshot tucked into his waist, and like he might need it. Tommy was barely 5, skittish and soft-voiced, and Clara, the baby, was just 3, still sleeping with one thumb in her mouth and the other wrapped around the hem of her sister's skirt. They took up space Illy hadn't realized his home had. His floor creaked more, the fireplace burned faster. The room felt smaller, warmer, more alive than it had in years. But it wasn't the noise or movement that unnerved him. It was the quiet gratitude. The way they thanked him without words. The way Nathan nodded when Illy handed him a plate. The way Lisa folded his shirts after drying them. The way Clara offered him her ragged doll as a trade for a warm mug of tea. These were children used to paying for kindness. He didn't ask about the man who fathered them. He didn't need to. He saw the answers in Myra's face when she stirred, half conscious, eyes darting to count the children before she even registered where she was. He saw it in the way the kids flinched at the sound of boots on wood. He saw it in the bruises that hadn't fully faded from Myra's ribs. By the fourth day, Myra finally sat up on her own. Her lips were dry, but her voice, when it came, was clear and even. "I told you not to follow me," she said. Illy, kneeling to check her bandage, didn't look up. "You told me a lot of things without saying a word." She winced as he adjusted her splint. "You should have left us there." "I did," he said quietly. "Once." She didn't reply, just closed her eyes and leaned back, her breath catching for a moment as pain stitched itself through her side. The fire cracked between them, filling the space where too many things wanted to be said. Later that night, he found Nathan sitting on the porch, wrapped in one of Illy's coats, watching the moon drag silver light across the trees. Illy joined him without speaking, settling onto the top step. They sat in silence for a while before the boy finally spoke. "She doesn't sleep much," and Nathan said. Illy nodded. "She gets up when she thinks we're out, checks our shoes, our coats, makes sure we got enough food packed in the sacks. She always thinks she's going to have to run again." Illy turned to look at him, surprised by the calm in his voice. "You ever ask her why?" Nathan shook his head. "Didn't have to." They didn't speak again after that. Not that night, but something shifted between them. The boy stood a little taller the next day. Illy stopped waiting for thanks. That week, he repaired the broken sled behind the cabin and hitched it to his old mule. Hauled back 2 sacks of flour and a half-cured ham from Wren Valley, told the shopkeeper he'd taken in a distant cousin, then left before the man could ask anything else. When he came back, Myra was sitting near the fire, her hair still damp from a wash, holding Clara in her lap. "You're not obligated," she said simply when he set the supplies down. "Neither are you," he replied, and that somehow settled it. It wasn't a decision. There were no declarations, no promises exchanged under candle light, just a quiet series of choices. Myra stopped leaving after supper. The children unpacked their few belongings into the corner shelves. Ben asked if he could sleep in the loft. Lissa started keeping track of meals. Nathan offered to help Illy fix the chicken coop. Myra began mending the seams of Illy's shirts without comment, and Illy, without realizing, started looking forward to the sound of small footsteps in the morning. But peace never holds in places like Wren Valley. Not for long. It was nearly 2 weeks before anyone came asking. The first was a woman, older, pinched face, hair pulled back so tight it looked like it hurt. She rode up to the cabin midday, dust on her boots and disapproval in her eyes. She barely glanced at Illy before demanding, "You seen Myra Jansen?" Illy stood on the porch, arms crossed. "Who's asking?" "Her husband's cousin." The woman lied. He didn't flinch, that's so. "She's taken something." Ran off with the children, man Espine beside himself looking. Illy said nothing, just let the silence stretch until the woman's eyes narrowed. "You hiding her?" she asked flatly. "Lady," he said, voice low. "If I was, I wouldn't tell you." She left in a huff, but Illy watched her until she disappeared down the trail and then rode out himself the next morning, taking the long route through the hills, checking for fresh tracks, listening for distant hooves. He told Myra that night what happened. She didn't cry, didn't panic, just pulled her children close and whispered something in a language Illy didn't know. The next day, he built a hidden latch on the Troppo in the pantry just in case. But for a time after that, things settled again. Spring tried its best to shake off the last of the frost. Myra began moving easier. Her arm still itched, but she used it without complaint. She planted small roots in the back garden. The children laughed more. Clara started calling Illy Papa by accident. The first time she said it, Myra froze like she'd been slapped, but Illy just smiled and touched the girl's hair. Still beneath the warmth, Illy felt it. That pull of something unfinished, like breath held too long, a storm circling just beyond sight. He'd seen it before. He knew its scent. It came on a Tuesday. Illy was out with Nathan and Ben repairing the west fence when they saw the rider. Dark coat, black horse, straight-backed and slow-moving like a man who didn't expect trouble, but knew what to do if it came. Illy told the boys to stay back. He stepped out onto the trail just as the man pulled up his reins. "You Mercer?" the rider asked. I'm looking for Myra Jansen." "What for? She's mine," the man said, calm as water. "Took my kids, took my name, think she can disappear." Illy felt something cold twist low in his chest. "She's not yours," he said. The man dismounted slowly, unhurried, confident she will be. And then, without warning, the man smiled. A slow, knowing curve of the mouth. She was always good at making men think they were saving her. He said, "You'll see." Illy didn't reply, didn't move. But that night he slept with his boots on, kept a lantern burning low, and when he heard Myra's footsteps in the hall, saw her silhouette pause near the doorway, he knew she'd heard every word. The wind shifted the next morning, the air felt different, and Illy Mercer, once a man who swore he'd never open his door to another soul, found himself checking the windows, counting firewood, measuring distance between the cabin and the tree line. Something was coming, he just didn't know when. It began with the dog. Illy hadn't kept one in years. Not since the cattle days, when a good dog could mean the difference between a quiet night and a slaughtered pen. He hadn't needed one, not until now. So when Nathan came back from the northern ridge with a half-cent starved mutt trailing him, ribs sharp and eyes watchful, Illy didn't ask questions. He just nodded. "We'll call him Scout." Scout proved useful quick, alert, quiet, smart enough to know not to bark unless it mattered. He stayed close to the porch, eyes fixed on the horizon. Lisa took to brushing his coat each evening. Ben fed him scraps and declared him their protector. But it wasn't the dog that made Illy feel safer. It was the look Myra gave it, like something old in her had finally unclenched. She was changing. That was the hardest part to ignore. Not into someone else, but into herself. The way her spine straightened. The way she smiled when she thought no one was watching. The way she began humming softly as she folded clothes. Her voice nearly lost beneath the crackle of firewood. She still didn't speak much, but when she did, it landed with weight. Not fear, not hesitation, just truth. "Your fence is weak on the eastern side," she said one morning, not long after the snow melted. "Foxes will find the chickens if you don't patch it." Illy glanced over his shoulder, surprised. "I thought you didn't care for the animals. I care about breakfast, and that was that." But something else shifted that week, too. Something less visible. The children were thriving. Yes. Nathan even laughed out loud once, and Illy watched Myra's head whip around at the sound like she couldn't quite believe it. Clara had begun drawing little stick figures with wild yellow hair and big square homes. Even Tommy stopped hiding behind chairs when strangers passed by on the trail. But Myra, she was quieter now in a different way. Not guarded, not afraid, just distant. She was planning something. Illy knew the signs. He had once prepared to leave everything he owned behind. Knew how people looked when they started measuring weight in terms of what they could carry. So he waited. He didn't ask, but he noticed the way she moved slower through the cabin. The way she folded maps she didn't used to read. The way her eyes lingered too long on the hills beyond the ridge. Then one night he heard her crying, not loud, not broken, just a quiet, trembling kind of grief muffled behind the bedroom door. Illy didn't enter. He sat on the floor near the fire instead, his back against the wall, Scout curled at his feet. He didn't sleep, neither did she. The next morning she was gone, not far, just up the trail near the creek. She was kneeling by the water, her hands in her lap, hair braided tight. She looked up as Illy approached, but didn't move. He sat beside her on the frozen earth and said nothing. "I thought about leaving," she said finally, taking them and walking west, disappearing again. Illy kept his eyes on the water. "Why didn't you?" She drew in a slow breath. "Because I think you to follow." "I would." She nodded. "And I'm tired of running." Silence stretched between them. not uncomfortable, but full of the weight that comes from shared understanding. Myra picked up a smooth stone, turned it in her hand, then set it gently in the current, and watched it disappear. "That man," she said, "the one who came asking for me, his name is Roland Jansen. My husband by law, not by choice. He wasn't always cruel, just proud. The kind of pride that spoils if left unchecked." Illy said nothing. "He didn't want a wife," she continued. "He wanted obedience. I gave it for a while, then I gave him children. That's when he got worse." Her voice didn't shake, but her fingers dug into her skirt as she spoke. "He'd leave for days, come back angry. I never asked where he went. I only asked that he leave the children out of it." She looked up then, eyes hard and clear. "He didn't." Illy's jaw tightened. "I took them one night while he was gone, left a note, said I hoped he'd never find us, but men like him don't let go of what they think they own." Illy turned toward her. "You're not his anymore." She looked at him for a long time, then nodded once. "I'm not." They walked back in silence, the children already setting the table for breakfast. Lisa handed Myra a cup of tea without asking where she'd been. Nathan was trying to teach Ben how to tie knots. Clara had drawn another picture, this one of the cabin with 6 little figures out front, one holding a stick and the other holding what looked like a loaf of bread. Myra smiled at it for a long while before setting it gently on the mantel. Illy didn't tell her that Roland Jansen had returned. Not yet. He'd seen him 2 nights earlier, just beyond the ridge, watching from the trees. Illy had crept out with scout rifle in hand, but the man had vanished before he could reach him, left behind a single crushed cigarette and a footprint in the mud. He hadn't told Myra because fear could break what little peace they'd managed to build. But he knew time was short, so he prepared, fixed the locks on the doors, reinforced the shutters, dug a second trench behind the barn, and taught Nathan how to signal with smoke if he ever saw a rider coming. He told the children they were playing games. He told himself he was just being cautious, but Myra knew. He caught her watching him late one night as he checked the bolt on the front door. Her eyes were steady. No panic, just the acceptance of a woman who'd lived too many years in uncertainty. "You think he's close," she said. "I know he is." She didn't ask why he hadn't told her, didn't accuse him of trying to protect her. Instead, she walked over and picked up the rifle leaning near the door, checked the chamber, looked down the sight. "I won't run again." Illy nodded. "You won't have to." The next morning Roland came, not alone. 2 men rode beside him, one tall and grimmel-looking, the other young and jittery. They stopped 50 yards from the cabin. Illy stepped onto the porch, rifle slung across his back. Myra just behind him, her arm no longer spinted, her stance calm. Roland removed his hat and smiled. "Myra," he said, voice slick and low, "you look well." She didn't answer. "I've come to take you home. You never gave me one." She replied. Roland's smile slipped. "You're making this harder than it has to be." Illy stepped forward then. "You're not welcome here." Roland's eyes flicked toward him, amusement simmering beneath the surface. "You think you matter to her?" Illy's voice was quiet. "I know I do." There was a beat of silence. Then Roland nodded as if deciding something. "You'll regret this," he said. "I already regret ever letting her go," Illy replied. Roland's hand twitched toward his coat. Myra didn't flinch, neither did Illy, but Roland didn't draw. He just sneered, turned his horse, and rode off without another word, the 2 men flanking him like shadows. Illy exhaled slowly. "He'll be back." "I know," Myra said, "but next time we'll be ready." And for the first time since she'd arrived, she reached for his hand, not out of desperation, not out of fear, but as a choice, one that neither of them would walk back from. The chickens were gone the next morning. All of them, every last hen, every last egg. The coop door had been left wide open, hinges dangling like snapped bone. No prints, no blood, just feathers scattered like snow in the dirt. Ellie didn't have to guess. Roland had come back, not with fists, not with fire, but with patience, with small, sharp slices meant to bleed slowly, meant to wear them down before a final blow. Myra didn't say a word when she saw the wreckage. She just picked up a handful of crushed feathers and dropped them one by one into the wind. Lissa stood behind her, lips tight, fists tighter. Nathan scanned the tree-line, jaw clenched. Ben kicked at a loose plank. Clara started crying, too young to understand, but old enough to feel the shift in the air. That afternoon, Illy rode into Wren Valley. Supplies. Myra stayed behind to mend the fence with Nathan. She didn't want Illy going alone, but she understood the message too well. They couldn't live on fear. Not again. Not even if it curled under the door at night and whispered like a knife through darkness. The town had changed since he'd last been. People stared longer, whispered more. The story had started to spread. Not just that he'd taken in a woman and her children, but which woman, whispers of theft, betrayal, wandering bloodlines. Illy didn't flinch. He bought flour, salt, dried beans, replaced the axe Roland had split down the handle and left embedded in the porch post sometime during the night, a jagged symbol more than a threat. He rode back slower than usual. Something in his gut coiled wrong. The moment he stepped into the clearing, he saw it. The shed behind the barn was burning. Not much left, just black beams and scorched earth. But it had been enough to frighten the horses, who now paced inside their pen, whinnied and restless. Myra was already throwing water bucket by bucket, her movements tight and practiced. The fire was mostly out, but the smoke curled thick in the air, choking the last of daylight. Where are the kids? Illy asked, leaping off the horse. In the cellar, Myra said, breathless. Nathan took them when he saw the smoke. Anyone see who did it? No, but they didn't need to. Inside the cabin, nailed to the wall above Illy's bed, was a strip of Myra's old apron, torn, singed, and tied in a perfect bow. Below it, carved deep into the wood with something sharp, were 3 words. She is mine. Illy didn't speak. He just stared at it for a long time before turning and walking out. Myra followed him, her expression unreadable. Do we leave? She asked. No. He said, we make it clear we're not afraid. But fear wasn't the problem anymore. Anger was the kind that crawled up the spine and settled in the teeth. The kind that didn't scream but waited. Illy wasn't a violent man, not anymore, but he'd lived a life. He fought for things before. Land, cattle, respect. This time it was different. This time it was people. This time he wasn't willing to lose, so he started planning. He fortified the cabin not like a fortress, but like a haven that could withstand. He moved the children's sleeping pallets closer to the hearth, where walls were thickest. He kept his rifle near. Nathan stayed close to the window. Lisa tied bells to the back door with fishing line. Ben started carrying a kitchen knife in his belt like a miniature soldier. Myra didn't object. She didn't coddle them. She taught them how to be careful, not scared. 3 days passed, then 4. No sign of Roland until the letter came. Illy found it nailed to a tree stump near the edge of the property. Folded parchment sealed in red wax, like some gentleman's invitation inside just 4 lines. You made your choice. She made hers. The law is on my side. I'll come when I please. No signature, just a press thump in blood. Illy brought the letter to Myra. She read it once. Then again her hands didn't shake. He's bluffing, she said. He won't come with lawmen. He won't risk their questions. He won't need them. Illy said, he'll come with men who wear law on their lips and vengeance in their boots. Myra folded the letter and set it in the fire. That night, Illy stood watch alone. The air was too still. Scout paced at the door. Myra didn't sleep, but stayed near the children, her hand resting on Clara's back. Around midnight, the wind picked up. Scout growled once, low and sharp, and Illy stepped onto the porch just in time to see lanterns bobbing in the darkness. 3 of them weaving through the trees like fireflies with purpose. He didn't wait. He lit the signal torch near the barn. 3 bursts of flame meant for Nathan's eyes, a warning. They'd practiced for 2 weeks. The boy would wake Myra. They'd go down into the hidden root cellar beneath the pantry, double-latched and reinforced with stone. The plan was never for Illy to fight, only to delay long enough for them to vanish into the tunnel they dug into the hillside, long enough for them to live. But Illy didn't move. He stood on the porch, shotgun in hand, and waited. The first man stepped into the clearing, not Roland, one of his shadows, tall, thick, sh-shouldered, carrying a rifle with more confidence than he'd earned. The second came next, younger, jittery, and then Roland, smiling that slow, poisonous smile. "You really think you're going to stop me?" He called out loud enough for the wind to carry it. Illy didn't answer. "You're a fool, Mercer. She's not worth dying for." That was when Myra stepped out, not from the cellar, from the shadows behind the barn. She held the old hunting rifle Illy had kept stored away. Her stance perfect, her eyes steady. "Then come and find out," she said. Roland froze. "Myra," he warned, tone sharp. "Don't you dare! You threatened my children," she said. "You burned what little we had. You think I'll let you near them again?" Roland took a step forward. She fired, not to hit, but close enough. The shot ripped through the side of the tool shed, and the younger man dropped his gun and bolted into the trees. The other one hesitated, then cursed and followed. Roland stood alone. "You wouldn't," he said. "I just did." Illy stepped beside her. "Then you've got nothing left here. You think she'll stay with you?" Roland spat. "You think this is home?" Myra's voice was cold. "It's more home than you ever gave me." And then she lowered the rifle, not in surrender, in choice. "Go," she said, "before I change my mind." Roland stared at her, rage wearing with disbelief. But something in her face, something final, broke him. He turned and walked away. Forest swallowed him whole. Illy didn't speak until the last of the lantern light disappeared. Then he turned to Myra. "You weren't supposed to come out. I know. I could have handled it. I know." He looked at her. "But I'm glad you did." And she nodded, because this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming the right to stand and be seen. Inside, the children emerged slowly. Nathan still clutching the spare revolver Illy had given him. Lissa holding Clara tight. Ben staring out the window like a boy who had just watched his world shift. Myra went to them without a word, knelt, and pulled them all close, and in that moment Illy Mercer realized something simple and final. This was no longer just his cabin, it was theirs. After the threat passed, quiet returned, but it wasn't the same silence. It was deeper, heavier, filled with the weight of what almost was. They deserve, the fire, but now came the ashes, and what they chose to build next would cost more than any of them knew. The forest held its breath for days. No birds sang, no wind stirred the pines. Even the creak of the woodshed door had lost its rhythm. Illy moved through the world like a man who knew peace was temporary, like a man counting his blessings while waiting for the toll. But Myra, she changed again, not outwardly, not in ways that called attention, but in the way her hand lingered on Clara's curls a second longer, or the way she looked out the window just before dawn like she needed to see the sky before it changed again. She never asked if Roland was truly gone. Illy never promised he was, but they began to live again. Small things came first. Nathan started building a wooden box for the kindling, carving each corner with careful, deliberate strokes. Lissa planted beans along the back fence. Ben found a half-broken harmonica in one of Illy's drawers and carried it everywhere, playing sour, breathy tunes that somehow still filled the air with life. Tommy followed Myra like her shadow, always one step behind her boots, and Clara, bright, witty-eyed Clara, started sleeping. Through the night, Myra moved differently now. She no longer kept her satchel near the door, no longer left her boots half, laced for speed. She let herself take up space, stayed at the table longer, read aloud to the children in the evenings, stitched a quilt from old flannels that had belonged to no one in particular. It wasn't that she forgot. It was that she allowed herself to live in something bigger than fear. And Illy, he let her. He fixed things she didn't ask him to. tightened the hinges on the pantry door so they didn't squeal in the dark, found a second-hand pair of boots for Lisa. On his next trip to town, built a tiny shelf above the hearth so Myra could line it with what she called her pretty useless things. A blue stone from the creek, a pine cone shaped like a rose, the child's drawing of their cabin framed in worn barnwood. Still, even comfort has sharp corners. It came on a Sunday afternoon. The weather had warmed enough for the children to play near the stream. Myra stood waist-deep in laundry, her hands raw from soap and water. Illy had taken to mending the barn roof, balancing on the slats in the pale sun. The air was calm, too calm. Scout barked once, then again. Illy turned toward the treine. Nothing, but the bark didn't stop. It changed, low, urgent, a warning, not a greeting. Myra looked up, eyes narrowing. She dropped the wet shirt back into the basin and dried her hands on her skirt. Illy climbed down from the roof and whistled two short, sharp notes. The children came running, but no rider appeared. No crack of twigs, just quiet, dense, holding its breath. That night, Scout wouldn't sleep. He circled the cabin over and over, ears perked, tail rigid. Myra sat by the hearth with the rifle in her lap. Illy didn't argue. He just pulled a chair beside her and poured them both coffee that had gone bitter from reheating too many times. "You think it's him?" she asked. "I think he's not far," Illy said, "and I think he's waiting for us to get comfortable." Myra stared into the fire. "He'll try something different next time. He won't get the chance." But despite the words, neither of them felt steady. The next few days were quiet, but not in the way they hoped. It was the kind of quiet that frayed the nerves, made every creak in the floorboards feel like a footstep. Myra doubled the food storage. Lisa kept the baby close. Nathan slept with a hammer under his pillow. No one said anything, but no one slept deeply either. Then came the letter, not nailed this time, not tossed in anger. Delivered. A man wrote in late afternoon. A stranger, clean-shaven, tidy coat, polite voice. Said he was from the county registrar's office. Said he was there to discuss a custodial matter involving Myra Jansen and her children. Illy didn't let him pass the porch. "We're not interested in discussing anything," he said. The man smiled. "Ma'am," he said, glancing at Myra behind the screen door, "it might benefit you to hear what the law has to say." She stepped out chin high. "What law?" "Your husband's petitioned the court." The man said smoothly, "He's filed for legal custody on grounds of abandonment and mental instability." Myra laughed a bitter, sharp sound. "Instability? He broke my arm." The man didn't blink. "Do you have proof?" Illy stepped forward. "You can leave now. I suggest you come to the hearing," the man said calmly, mounting his horse. "Or it'll be decided without you." He left a sealed envelope behind. Myra didn't open it. She burned it instead, but it changed things, not because they believed the law would side with Roland, but because they knew it could. "I don't have documents," she said quietly to Illy later that night. "No papers, no wedding certificate, no birth records, nothing but their names and my word. That's enough for me. It won't be for them." Illy didn't know what to say. He was a man who had built his life without paperwork, without signatures. He didn't understand a world where family had to be proven. So Myra made a decision. "We need to talk to the Reverend," she said. "The one in Wren Valley. He knew me, knew what Roland was like. He may not speak for me, but he might not speak against me either." Illy hesitated. "If Roland's still nearby, he already knows where I am." So they packed the children and made the trip 2 days later, leaving before dawn. Myra wore her hair pinned tight. Lisa held Clara clothes. Nathan rode in back with the rifle across his lap. Illy drove the wagon, silent, focused. Wren Valley never looked smaller. The buildings felt like they leaned inward now, listening, judging. The Reverend was an old man, thin, eyes like clear water. He remembered Myra too well, remembered Roland too. He didn't say much, didn't offer kindness, but when Myra asked if he'd speak on her behalf if called, he gave a single nod. I don't get involved in family business, he said, but I'll tell the truth. It was more than she'd hoped for. On the way back, they stopped for supplies. Myra took the children to the feed store. Illy went to pick up flour. He didn't see Roland until it was too late. The man stepped out from between two buildings, walking like he had all the time in the world. No rush, no fear, just the same confidence that had carried him through every lie, every bruise, every court filing. "I'm glad you came," he said. Illy didn't move. Roland smiled. "They'll take my side. They always do. Especially when the woman doesn't even know how to sign her name proper." Illy's fist moved before he thought. Just one hard and fast years of anger behind it. Roland staggered back, nose bleeding. "You don't speak her name again," Illy said, voice low. "You don't come near her. You don't breathe in her direction." A few townsfolk had gathered, but no one said a word. Roland didn't hit back, just wiped the blood and smiled. "You'll see," he said. "The law is slow, but it doesn't forget." They rode back in silence. The wind picked up, the sky turned brittle, and that night Myra stood outside long after the others went to sleep. Her shawl wrapped tight, her hands gripping the porch rail like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Illy joined her slow. "We'll fight him," he said. She didn't look at him, just said, "I'm not afraid of losing them. I'm afraid of what I'll become to keep them." "You won't become anything you're not already," he said gently, and for once she leaned on him just for a moment, just enough, because love wasn't declarations or rings or church vows. Sometimes it was silence shared at the edge of the dark, and both of them knew in their bones that Roland hadn't played his final hand, not yet. The summons came wrapped in official wax, but the fear it carried had nothing to do with paper. Delivered by stage courier, folded in cream-colored vellum like a wedding invitation. The lettering sharp, precise, declared a date, a time, and a location, County Court, 3 days' ride south, where Roland Jansen intended to reclaim what he claimed was his by birthright and marriage. Illy watched Myra read it by firelight. She held the paper like it might tear under her grip, eyes scanning and re-scanning as if willing the words to change, but they didn't. The court would listen. The judge would decide, and Myra, who had never been allowed to testify for herself, would have to stand alone. Except she wasn't alone. Illy placed his hand over hers, steadying it, grounding her. "We'll go," he said. "We can't take the children." "No." He agreed, "but they'll be safe here. Liz is strong. Nathan knows what to do. We taught them." Myra didn't speak for a long time. Just stared at the flame like it might answer for her. Then finally, "If they take them from me, they won't." But the thought hung in the air like smoke, bitter, lingering. They left at first light 2 days later. Illy hitched the wagon tight. Myra wore her one decent dress pressed clean, her braid pulled low, tight against the wind. They left the children with enough food, enough water, and the kind of goodbye that felt more like a promise than a parting. Ben clung to her skirt. Clara sobbed. Nathan stood silent, eyes blazing. "I'll bring her back," Illy told them, and then they rode south. The journey felt longer than it was. The world changed around them, snow giving way to thaw, brown hills turning soft with spring. They didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. Myra's hand in his lap was enough. Her silence was not fear any more. It was resolve. They reached the courthouse before dusk on the 3rd day. A wide building with whitewashed columns and chipped steps, its paint curling like old paper. Men stood around the steps, smoking, muttering. The clerk waved them in without looking up. Inside it smelled of dust and old sweat. The pews creaked. The judge, an older man with pale eyes and a face carved from fatigue, sat like a stone figure behind the bench. Roland was already seated, clean-shaven, suit pressed, smug. Myra didn't look at him. Hearing was short. Questions were asked, documents presented. Roland had witnesses, a banker who claimed Myra abandoned her accounts, a cousin who'd never met the children, but vouched for Roland's steady character. And then Roland himself stood and painted himself the victim. "She left without warning," he said, voice calm. "Even took the children. No note, no reason. I searched for years. I only want what's mine, my wife, my family." And when the judge asked if Myra wanted to respond, she rose, not with hesitation, but with purpose. "My children are not property," she said. "And I was never yours." The courtroom fell silent. "I fled with bruises," she continued. "I fled because my oldest son asked me to, because he saw what kind of man you were before I could shield him from it, because my daughter started to cry when you entered a room." She turned to the judge. "I have no papers, no money, but I have their trust, their love. I never abandoned them. I saved them." And then she sat. The judge said little, just looked between them with eyes that had seen too much. Then he dismissed the hearing, promising a written decision within the week. Outside, the air felt too still, like a world waiting to exhale. Myra didn't speak on the wagon ride home. Illy didn't push. But when they reached the ridge and saw smoke curling soft from the cabin chimney, something in both of them finally eased until they saw what was hanging on the porch. A doll, Clarara's favorite, stained, torn, nailed to the wall like a crucifix. Myra gasped, leaping from the wagon before the horses even stopped. She yanked the doll down with trembling hands, clutched it against her chest, her eyes wide, her mouth silent. Inside the cabin, nothing was broken, but nothing was whole either. The cellar door was wide open, the food stores untouched, and on the table written in chalk, "You lose." Lisa was gone. Nathan, Ben, Clara, Tommy, no notes, no footprints, no sign of struggle, just absence. Illy fell to his knees. Myra stood like a statue, her hands still wrapped around the doll. Then she whispered one word. Where? Illy looked up. Where would he take them? He closed his eyes, thought like a man possessed, and then he remembered. South Ridge, past the split in the creek, where Roland's cousin once owned a hunting cabin. Empty now, remote, no law, no eyes. Myra, but she was already moving. Already untying the horse, already in the saddle. Illy followed. They rode like fire through the hills, dusk bleeding into night. No words, just the sound of hooves and heartbeats. The cabin appeared at the edge of a hollow, small, dark, quiet, too quiet. Illy tied the horses back, crept toward the door, rifle drawn. Myra held a blade in one hand, the doll in the other, as if Clara could still feel her near. Then a sound, a cry, muffled. Inside, they moved fast, no hesitation. Illy kicked the door in. What they found wasn't what they feared, but it was close. The children were huddled in one corner, ropes loose, faces pale. Nathan stood in front of them like a wall. Roland sat across the room, drunk, glass in hand, pistol on the floor near his boot. "You came," he slurred. Myra stepped forward. Roland raised the glass. "Cheers to the end." She didn't answer, just crossed the floor, dropped the doll at his feet, and picked up the pistol before he could blink. Then she turned her back to him. "Come on." She told the children, time to go. Roland didn't follow, didn't fight, just laughed. As they left the cabin, Illy looked back once and saw Roland still sitting in the dark. Alone, broken. By the time they reached home, the sun was rising. Lisa held Myra's hand like she'd never let go. Clara slept in Illy's arms. Ben cried without sound. Nathan walked barefoot but upright, strong. Inside the cabin, Myra collapsed onto the floor, the doll still in her hand, and for the first time since she'd met him, Illy wept. Not because of pain, but because it was over, or at least this part. The days that followed passed, not like time, but like healing, slow, uneven, never in a straight line. The cabin, once a place of shelter, had become something more, not just four walls. Not a hiding place, a beginning. The kind Myra had never been allowed to imagine for herself. Not even in her boldest, most reckless thoughts. A life where no one had to flinch when boots hit the porch. Where doors weren't locked out of fear. Where voices didn't echo with dread or silence. Morning after they returned, Myra didn't rise with the dawn. She stayed curled on the floor near the hearth, still in the same dress she'd ridden in, her hand tangled in Clarara's curls. When Illy stirred, he didn't wake her. He just pulled a quilt over both of them and started coffee with slow, reverent hands, By mid-morning, Lisa had set to cleaning the front room. Nathan chopped wood with focus and force beyond his years. Ben insisted on sleeping beside Myra, head on her hip like she might vanish if he let her go. And Tommy didn't let go of her hand the whole day, not even when she moved. No one asked where Roland had gone. They didn't need to. Sometimes the worst punishment isn't death. It's knowing you've lost fully and forever, and being forced to live with the quiet that follows. The next day, Myra bathed. She dressed in clean clothes, pulled her hair back with ribbon Clara had once knotted around a stick doll, and stepped onto the porch with a face that looked 10 years older and 20 years stronger. "I want to rebuild the chicken coop," she said to Eli. He didn't blink, just stood, nodded, and fetched his tools. They worked all day. Nathan helped dig foundation. Lisa fetched nails and wood. Ben wandered in and out with Scout, who hadn't left Mira aside since their return. Myra kept busy, measuring each board twice, hammering each nail with precision. She didn't talk much, but her silence didn't hang heavy. It was focused, certain. The coop went up by sunset, and when the last beam was set, Eli handed her the hammer. She drove the final nail. That night they all ate together, not just eating, celebrating. Nathan told a joke badly. Lisa rolled her eyes. Ben fell asleep in his soup. Clara chased fireflies just beyond the doorway, her laughter floating like music through the trees. And when Myra looked at Eli across the table, something in her eyes softened. "Will you come with me tomorrow?" she asked. "Where?" "Wren Valley." "I want to file papers." Eli sat back. "Papers for the children," she said. "If something happens to me, I want their names protected. I want this place to be theirs." Eli nodded, of course, but Myra didn't stop there. She hesitated, then looked down at her hands. "I want to change my name." Eli's breath caught. "To what?" She looked at him, not shy, not uncertain, just steady. "To Myra Cooper." A long silence fell between them. Eli stood slowly, crossed the room, and knelt beside her. "You don't need to take my name," he said. "I know." She replied, "But I want it. Not because I'm yours, because I'm not his." He didn't touch her, just sat beside her. And for the first time since that knock on his door, he smiled. The next morning they rode together again. This time, not in desperation, not in fear, but in purpose. The courthouse clerk raised an eyebrow when Myra handed her the form. "Cooper, huh?" she said. Myra nodded. "That's right." The clerk stamped it without ceremony. "Well, Miss Cooper, welcome to Wren County. It wasn't a wedding. There was no preacher, no rings, no vows whispered over candlelight." But Myra held the signed paper with a reverence deeper than any ceremony could give. It wasn't about Eli, not directly. It was about becoming something more than what she'd endured. A self she chose, a family she claimed, a future she named. When they returned to the cabin, Scout was the first to greet them. Then came Nathan, dragging a broken chair he wanted help fixing. Lisa was teaching Clara to braid grass into crowns. Ben had a splinter in his thumb and insisted only Myra could remove it. Tommy showed off a lizard he'd caught and named Sheriff. The sun was high. The porch smelled of pine and bread. And for the first time Myra stepped into her home. Not as a guest, not as a fugitive, as Myra Cooper. Weeks passed. The rhythm returned. Not the same rhythm, something new, stronger. Myra taught the children how to preserve berries. Eli showed Nathan how to build a windbreak. Lisa read to Clara by lantern light, and Ben learned to whistle poorly, but loudly. Myra repainted the cabin shutters. Green, hope-colored, she called them. One evening, as the sky turned the shade of ash before stormlight, Eli took Myra's hand on the porch. "I want to build something." She glanced at the cabin. "You already did." "No," he said. "For you, for all of you." He led her around the back of the barn where an open plot stretched wild with weeds in memory. "I want to build a second cabin here," he said. "For the children, for when they're grown. A place that's theirs." Myra blinked hard, swallowed. "That's a long time away." "Not really," Eli said. "Not if we want to get it right." She nodded once, then twice. "Let's do it," she said. They began the next morning. It wasn't grand, just beams, boards, sweat. But each plank carried intention. Each nail was a choice, and as it rose, so did something inside them all. Not just safety, legacy. One night, after the children had gone to bed and the stars blinked sharp overhead, Myra stepped outside and found Illy at the edge of the trees. She didn't speak right away. Then do you ever wonder how different your life might have been? He looked at her every day. And do you regret it? He thought for a long time. No, he said, because it brought me here. She leaned into him and for the first time kissed him. It wasn't passionate. It wasn't desperate. It was simple, certain. Years would pass. Ben would grow tall and loud. Lisa would marry a traveling bookkeeper and name her first daughter Myra. Nathan would take over the land, add 2 more cabins, and teach his children how to split wood without wasting strength. Tommy would become a teacher. Clara would become something none of them could yet imagine, bright, brilliant, bold. And Myra would become the woman she'd always been underneath the scars. A matriarch, a legend, a story whispered between fence posts and firelight. Not because she was saved, but because she rebuilt. Because she endured, because she dared to love again. And Ellie, he'd sit beside her every evening on that porch, watching their world grow from the seeds they never meant to plant. Not just survivors, not just protectors, family.